Welcome friends, welcome back to your channel Book Lover where we do book reviews. Today we are going to do book review for this book. This is the book. The name of the book is The Politics of Information from Manu to Modi, The Truth About Us by Sanjoy Chakravorty. About this book, I can tell that this book is about how a nation defines itself. When you read the whole book, you realize that how critical it is important for anyone to define themselves. This book is basically tells us that if you are not in a position to tell your story, if you are not in a position to define yourself, then somebody else will define you. And that definition done by somebody else will not be in your favor. You remember that old saying which says that victors always write the history, and that is very true. But there is a other caveat to it. If you have the power, when you get the power back, you have the right and you must have the right to tell your story. Because if you don't tell your story, somebody else will tell their story in a way about you that it will not be conducive for you to survive. You will end up giving clarifications. When you start this book, you will always remember that history of India has been written by people like James Mills and Max Muller. These people have never visited India. About Max Muller, it is said that he has not even met any person of repute to write his history about India. His translations and all those things which we read, which is being taught. You see how history is written. When I go to the page 6 of this book, I will randomly read some pages from this book. This page number 6 of this book tells you how caste and politics have been playing a huge role. Now, if you look at how important, rather disturbing role the British played in our lives, can be seen at page number 9. If you go to page number 9 of this book, I will read the excerpts for you. The first element which attracts most attention is over the identity of Indian collective. Is it a pluralistic, heterogeneous society composed of many skilled social identities, or is it a homogeneous nation sprinkled with subservient minorities? This is a question that seems to hang in the air all the time, with never a hint that most of the major social categories are taken for granted today. They were made up by the British colonizers for their own convenience and then consolidated and expanded by the Indian political class for its own convenience. Going further, we can look at how the British has impacted the social fabric in India. There's a beautiful article in BBC Viewpoint how the British reshaped Indian caste dynamics, and there are also works of historians like Nicholas Dirks which you can read regarding this. Number 19 of this book, you can see how an American anthropologist by the name Bernard Cohen explains how a nation is controlled. When the colonizers set about structuring information in India in the late 18th century, they knew two things. First, that they needed information on their subjects to rule them. It is very critical. You cannot rule a society if you don't know anything about a society. Second, there was little or no resistance on their power to choose or divide what information, how to structure it. And they had absolute power on how to tell what they want to tell. Narrative building. Now let us read what Bernard Cohen has said here. The establishment and maintenance of a nation states depends upon determining, codifying, controlling, and representing the past. The British India created and normalized a vast amount of information that formed the basis of their capacity to govern. In India, British entered a new world that they tried to comprehend using their own forms of knowledge, own forms of knowing and thinking. They unknowingly and unwittingly invaded and conquered not only territory but an epistemological space as well, and believed that they could explore and conquer their space through knowledge about the people they are ruling. The knowledge was to enable the British to classify, categorize, and bound the vast social world that was India so that it could be controlled. Several of the important ideas underpinning this book are captured in this passage. This particular passage is basically the crux of the whole book, and that gave them time and energy to control whatever they could control in spite of all the heroic efforts. The heroic efforts had ultimately led us to independence. Our schools and colleges do not teach these things. This line is important. They are too complicated or too inconvenient or both. This again tells us about how history has been used as a tool to divide people and then rule the people. Now let us look at what people who came here to do the census think about India from their viewpoints. Cornish, who supervised operations in Madras Presidency, commented. Now look at what the so-called historians of repute like James Mills and Max Muller have done. I am quoting from page 105. It did not appear to matter that much of the raiding took place from far away. This line has a meaning because James Mill never visited India. So much of the raiding took from far away. So did Max Muller. Max Muller never visited India. They wrote everything, a great deal of things about India. James Mill's The History of British India, written in 1818, was openly racist, overgeneralized, and utterly dismissive book that became the most influential work on India and a manual for the East India Company officers in the first half of 19th century, whose work half a century later was oriented in the opposite direction than Mill's, being the primary proponent of common origin theory of South Asia and European people. More on Miller and his ideas later. Mill and Miller did not see India to write about it because this is again important, because when one had power to declare it so, that taxes turned out to be more than sufficient to read the reality of living people. So when any country has the power to write your history, they will write anything they want to write that benefits them. This is our history. This is how our history has been written. So it's time that we start reading books that makes things more clear for us. So this is a review for this book. Nice book to read. Good reading. Have a great time. Take care. See you again. Bye.